Gavin, could you just tell me a little bit about the DART Center and what the focus is? It's a really interesting focus to combine trauma and journalism, but it's on a few different levels. Is that right? Can you tell me a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the DART Centre is sort of a kind of global network of journalists, educators and mental health professionals, people who are interested in improving the coverage of violence, trauma and tragedy. And so we're run by journalists, and we're very much run for journalists. So when we organise debates and conversations, it's always sort of journalist-led, but we bring in outside expertise. We might bring in a particular psychiatrist who knows something about interviewing, say, the victims of torture, or we might bring in a military psychiatrist who knows about the difficulties of journalists working in war zones, in order to kind of spread that kind of expertise a bit more widely into the journalism community, and to give journalists tools that make them more resilient and also better able to interview people.
So it's sort of two different focuses.
Yeah, it's two sides of and they're connected things, sort of two sides of the same coin really. One is how does a journalist look after themselves, so it's to do with kind of self-care, working with traumatic material. The other question is how does a journalist get to the heart of a traumatic story? How do they interview sources who may have been affected by trauma in a way that doesn't do them any harm, and at the same time get them an emotionally accurate picture of what happened?
And why is this necessary? Tell me, what is it that journalists are missing, and what is happening that makes a whole centre focused on trauma and journalism?
Well, it's a very strange thing in some ways. There isn't much space within the industry, even though lots of journalists deal on an everyday basis with things like car crashes, violent crime, or if they're foreign specialists, they might be dealing with extreme poverty or war or conflict in different times. Somehow this kind of idea is that because the profession is so demanding and so kind of fast-paced, is that there isn't the time to think about these issues in a more kind of reflective way. I think also part of it is that we like to see ourselves as kind of sort of uber cool reapers of facts, so we can imagine that we can go into the field, collect all this data, and in a very unproblematic way report on it, but often we'll be sitting down and talking to people who are telling us about the most extreme things that have happened to them, what it's like to see a wife or a partner being raped in front of you, what's it like to witness a parent being killed. All these sorts of stories are the kind of fabric of a lot of journalism, but we try, I think, and kid ourselves a little bit that they're more straightforward than they really are.
What's the difference between being sort of more sensitive to the trauma and less?
Well, I suppose a kind of classic mistake that some journalists make is because they want, in order to make their story engaging, or to make their story one that the audience can relate to, is that they often want to get to the heart of a story, the emotional heart of a story. And so some journalists who perhaps aren't thinking very carefully about what they're doing might kind of blunder into somebody's life and then say, well, can you tell me, what did it feel like when you saw your friend die? Or something like that. But how do you think it felt like? Obviously, it felt awful. So that kind of question isn't very useful. So what we would suggest instead is that a journalist who wants to find out the details of a story, give the person time and space to think, and they create a kind of safe space for the person to walk into, to move into them. And they ask them questions that are very kind of simple and factual. What did you see? What happened? If people who are being interviewed aren't feeling pressured, and they feel they're respected and they feel they're listened to, then they'll give a more interesting and accurate story than they would do otherwise. And the other thing about it is that if you kind of blunder into people's lives and ask inappropriate questions and interview people in a kind of less than sophisticated way, it can be very distressing for the people that you're talking to. Whereas if you do it well, you can get a great story, and at the same time you can give somebody the opportunity to feel connected to the public, connected to the kind of wider world, which can be very empowering for somebody who's been affected by trauma. The best journalism can do more. It can give people a sense of narrative. It can help them kind of frame difficult situations in a way that's very positive.